Indiana has been coal country since, well, before Indiana was Indiana. In recent years, though, thanks to a push from the state's publicly regulated utilities, cleaner renewable sources of power such as wind, water, and the sun have carried an increasing share of the state's energy load. Some members of the General Assembly have sought to slow Indiana's transition from fossil fuels to renewables, citing concerns about reliability. Hi, I'm Jon Ford, and on this week's show, we'll do our best to illuminate the highly charged debate over Hoosiers' energy future. Indiana Lawmakers, from the State House to your house.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.
Because of its robust manufacturing sector, Indiana is the 9th most energy-intensive state per capita in the nation, using roughly 3 times more energy than it produces. While energy policy aims to balance reliability with economic development and environmental sustainability, these efforts are often at odds with each other. Increases in energy production can have negative impacts on the environment. Indiana utilizes several sources of renewable energy, including wind and solar power, which create less pollution than fossil fuels. Our state ranks 12th according to the American Clean Power Association for installed wind energy capacity. Solar energy use is limited, just shy of 1% of all electricity generated in the state, but its use is increasing. Yet almost half of the energy used in Indiana is still derived from coal, mined predominantly in the southwestern part of the state. In 2023, Indiana consumed 26 million tons of coal, second in the country only to Texas. In fact, Indiana has such a demand for coal, it has to import from neighboring states. As economic development opportunities have increased the demand for energy, the impact on the environment has been significant. Indiana leads the nation in most polluted waterways, with more than 24,000 total miles of rivers and streams listed as impaired for swimming and recreation. This trend toward pollution may accelerate as the Trump administration pauses federal funding for clean energy projects in Indiana. And this uncertainty has halted potential job opportunities and infrastructure development that would have accompanied the expansion of solar energy. I am pleased to welcome Democratic Representative Alex Burton of Evansville, a member of the House Committee on Utilities, Energy, and Telecommunications. Former State Senator Jon Ford, Executive Director of the Indiana Office of Energy Development. Kerwin Olson, Executive Director of Indiana's Citizens Action Coalition. And former State Representative Matt Bell, lobbyist for Reliable Energy, an advocacy group for the coal industry. Thank you all for being here. I guess we'll call that the seat of power. Get it? Yeah, seats for my guess. All right. I'm going to put up with a few of those today. Forgive me. Let's start with you, Jon Ford. You're now running the Office of Energy Development. Could you describe, at least as it stood, a lot has happened this week, but when the week started, could you describe Indiana's energy policy?
Yeah, well, thanks first of all for having me on the program and bringing this topic up. It's a top of mind of a lot of folks here in Indiana, but the energy policy is based on the 5 pillars. Some legislation that passed a few years ago. Those 5 pillars are reliability, affordability, sustainability, environmental impact, and sustainability. So what the policy is focused on those 5 things. So trying to make sure that we are hitting those 5 marks on what we're doing for the future and what we're doing currently.
Alex Burton, is that what the policy should be, those 5 pillars? That covers a lot of territory. I don't know if they're always applied equally, but
certainly, for me and the district that I represent, affordability is top of mind, and I'm looking forward to working with the administration to make sure that the bills in Southwest Indiana are certainly more affordable.
And I'm guessing, Matt Bell, since you represent an organization that has Reliable in its name, that is your crusade.
Absolutely.
Among the 5, that would be priority 1?
Priority 1 with affordability being a close priority 2. We think it's critical in Indiana that we have enough power to meet the demands of our economy today, but not only that, to meet the opportunities that are in front of us. There are amazing economic development opportunities for this state. Do we have the power to meet those demands? And we're concerned about that today, so reliability and grid stability are awfully important to us.
And Kerwin, you've said that in testimony on bills and others that this shouldn't be about economic development. I mean, if things happen, if investors pay for making various investments, that's all well and good. But you're concerned about a lot of the the implications about these bills that we'll talk about on everyday consumers.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the 5 pillars are appropriate, with affordability being top of mind for CAC. But one of the issues is, how are we defining affordability? How are we measuring affordability? And that's where I think we're failing, because folks are struggling. We have an affordability crisis not only in Indiana, in this country. And so we would like to see the administration, see the legislature address that, bring meaningful changes to where folks can afford their everyday bills.
I saw some of the recent data that suggests we're 28th in the country, maybe in terms of affordability, but I think we used to be, maybe the problem is we used to be the most affordable, or one of the most affordable. So any change is going to be felt.
Yeah, when
by
I started
lawmakers.
doing this work almost 20 years ago, we were, 10th or so in the country in terms of affordability. Now we're in the bottom tier, and folks are hurting.
Well, let's look at the trends, how we got to this point, because, again, there's so many cross currents in these discussions. Some of it's about energy, and then umpteen other things we might address. But if you look at the energy production in this state, coal was king before Indiana was Indiana, certainly. It fueled economic growth up until essentially the 70s or 80s, almost single-handedly. And as recently as, 15 years ago, we probably saw as much as 88%, thereabouts, of our net energy production in Indiana coming from coal. That's down now under 50%. So that's one trend. But I have the sense that because of various moratoriums on transition from coal to other types of reliable or renewable energy, and some of the brakes have been put on by the lawmakers, that if we charted it, it would sort of go one way, and now we're at an inflection point and maybe heading another direction. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think, as we've retired, some would say prematurely retiring assets here in Indiana, we haven't grown the new energy as fast. And so it's created this simple supply and demand issue, where we're then having to go out on the market and buy more power from the grid. But at the same time, we're seeing historic demand. We're seeing demand the last few years that we haven't seen in decades. And it's, kind of all coming to fruition based around technology.
Of course, the old question that always comes up, you were a former Republican lawmaker yourself, and the notion that free markets tend to be the best impetus for directing where these industries should go. Clearly this is, and maybe it's because it's a regulated market to begin with at least those investor-owned, publicly regulated utilities. But this is not free market at work here.
Yeah, here in Indiana, we have a vertically integrated system. So we have monopolies that we've created to make sure that, when they were created, to make sure we had power and we had investment in power. And, things have changed a little bit. And I think now is where we're trying to balance that out, where we can add new technologies, new forms of energy, but balance affordability. And that's really what we're talking about at the General Assembly this session.
And Alex, you talked about affordability, and that's certainly on front of mind for your constituents. At what cost? Or is that, as long as I'm getting a reasonable bill, everything else is secondary? Or where's the pushback on the notion that there should be impediments to the transfer, if you believe that there should be, from coal, for instance, to renewables?
Sure. We have to make sure that it's reliable. Our energy sources, we have to make sure that they're reliable. And I want to make sure that, with being a freshman legislator, that I'm coming in and getting brought up to speed in all things related to energy. But certainly, as we go down this pathway, I want to make sure that as energy costs and, as everyone says, we're in this transition period, that we're being cognizant that ratepayers are paying a lot of their residual income towards a utility bill that is taking away from their medications and housing expenses and the things that they want to do with their families.
How fearful should we be about reliability, Matt Bell? Is it, a couple of people have talked about it, it's in the name of your organization. Are we in some precarious position, would you argue, as a state?
So I think Indiana has done a lot of meaningful things to keep us from being in a precarious situation. To their credit, utility leaders in the House and Senate have said, number one, we want to embrace all forms of energy. Secondly, we're going to base our strategy. We're going to have a strategy, which is something we didn't have in Indiana for a long time. They outlined,
not until 2023, I guess, was the formal adoption of the 5 pillars.
So they've laid out principles that we have to adhere to. Nationally, we have a challenge, and we hear those warnings every day. We hear them from the North American Energy Reliable Council. We hear them from MISO. Demand is growing faster than supply. Indiana has done a lot to make sure that when its citizens turn the light switch, the lights come on. But there's more that we have to do to meet the opportunities that are in front of us. There's more that we have to do to ensure that we do that in an affordable way. So Indiana has positioned itself well But yes, there's a real challenge nationally, and we can't be immune from that.
Kerwin Olson, one of the things your organization has identified as problematic is the recruitment of data centers. They use a lot of energy. I'm not sure in my brain what a data center is, but I know it uses a lot of energy. And your organization, in fact, proposed a moratorium last fall, at least until some of these things stabilize. Is that the crux of the issue? If there were a moratorium, which I don't think there's an appetite for that, on data centers because of the economic development implications, would we be okay in your mind?
Well, from our perspective, we lose sight of one thing, and that's the utilities themselves have an obligation to serve the public, and they're going to position themselves to ensure that they're meeting that legal obligation. Secondly, we hear about a rise in demand. Well, that rise in demand is because of data centers coming to Indiana and the extraordinary amount of both energy and water that those facilities require. Look at NIPSCO, for example, in their most recent integrated resource plan. They said without data centers, we're in good shape. We can serve our customers. With data centers, we're going to need a whole lot of new resources. So yes, we have rising demand, but why is that demand rising? How do we meet that demand? And more importantly, from our perspective, who should be responsible for the financial implications that that demand brings and meeting that demand with new capacity?
And Jon Ford, I'm guessing that the Braun administration and your unit within that administration wouldn't be enthusiastic about saying no to those entities that are setting up these high dollar facilities in places like Fort Wayne. I've heard the Fort Wayne mayor talk about the implications, positive implications. Yeah, is that just a part of the trade-off here?
Yeah, I mean, I think political leaders in Indiana have been very open. We want these opportunities here in Indiana, and it's just not about the opportunity today, but it's the opportunity for the future, right? AI, quantum computing, it's not going away. It's here for the future, right? Our phones, our watches, everything's collecting data, and it has to be stored somewhere. And some might say it's a national security issue, that we want those data centers here in America. And of course, if they're going to be in America, we want them here in Indiana.
Makes sense to you, Alex Burton?
Somewhat. For me, I am, with us being 2 years into a strategy of energy as a policy person, we have to know where we're going as it relates to. So I'm thankful that there is a strategy now, but we also need to balance that, make sure as we're looking at the future for all Hoosiers, that we're making sure that our utility costs and costs that are coming back on our Hoosiers are more affordable than what they are. And I think that there is an opportunity. It's just going to take some intentional efforts and collaborations that go beyond party line to really just shape the future of what energy consumption and our future really looks like.
Is this the strategy that's been in place for a couple of years, is that still viable or valid? And I say that, and I alluded just after introducing you all to the notion that a lot has happened this week. At the federal level, we saw Lee Zeldin, the head of the EPA, essentially say, this is the grandest day in the history of deregulation in our agency. A former EPA director said it's the worst day in the history of the EPA, proving that it's all in perspective. But basically, a lot of the things that encouraged the push move toward renewables might be off the table. Now, granted, these rulemaking, they were rules in many cases, and they would have to be undone, which is not a snap of the fingers. But Matt Bell, is the old strategy still operative? And given, I should point out that the governor, on the heels of that announcement, said Indiana will follow the federal lead in terms of not enforcing regulations that are more strenuous than the federal level, and also exclude any thought of, he discussed it or described it as environmental justice in any rulemaking or any decision making by the local state officials in this regard. So is it still operative, the five pillars, would you say?
The 5 pillars lay a great foundation for Indiana to move forward, but absolutely there's the need to build on that. Before Mr. Zeldin's actions yesterday, his historic actions yesterday that are going to lift regulations and are going to make power more affordable and investment more plausible in the future, we had Secretary Wright say that everyone needs to be building to meet demand. So our Energy Secretary has said the very same thing. The Braun administration really addressed this issue from the time they were on the campaign trail on, talking about the need to ensure that Indiana has a reliable grid and that Hoosiers can afford to pay for the power that they're consuming. I think they're bold actions, even as we've begun, creating a cabinet secretary position to focus on energy, hiring some wonderful folks to run agencies, and hiring Jon, all speak to his commitment to ensuring that Indiana can lead economically on the back of a rock-solid grid that folks can afford. So it is a new day. The 5 pillars create the foundation that Indiana can build upon, but the leadership of Governor Braun and Secretary Jaworski and Director Ford and others is going to be critical for us.
Talk about shout-outs. Kerwin Olson, if this is all a chess game, and some people say lawmaking is the process of negotiation and debate, did the game board just get tossed out with this week? We used to worry, for instance, there was legislation that would make natural gas and propane a clean fuel under Indiana statute in hopes of getting federal dollars, grants for clean energy programs. Who's to say there will be even grants for clean energy programs? A lot of the landscape just fundamentally has changed, has it not?
Yeah, I think uncertainty is the name of the game right now. We're seeing things change on a daily basis. And
what does that do to an organization like yours?
Well, when you work on issues of sustainability, when you work on issues of affordability, and with limited resources, you have to pick your battles, pick your fights, and understand what are the priorities to achieve the end that we want to see. But lifting regulations on coal plants, from our perspective, is completely inconsistent. Number one, with affordability. It's expensive coal-fired power plants that have driven up costs in Indiana from our perspective, and then how does an unregulated coal plant fit into an environmental sustainability box with the havoc that it wreaks both on public health, our environment, and our climate? So we fail to recognize how continuing to operate unregulated, dirty coal-fired power plants fits into those 5 pillars.
Jon Ford, can a lack of regulation or a significant deregulation live comfortably with the notion of reliability? Reliability, and you called it chaos, I believe, or uncertainty.
Yes.
Can you reconcile uncertainty on one hand and reliability?
I think you can, and I think there's bills like 1007 that are going through the legislature right now that are putting guardrails up and providing that consistency that business is looking for investment, right? When we talk about SMRs and nuclear, the energy baseload power of the future, we do need to put guardrails up to make sure we're respecting the ratepayers, and I think that bill is an attempt to do that.
And let's talk about that. House Bill 1007, it passed out of the House, now in the hands of the Senate. One person who voted against it and spoke out against it was you, Alex Burton. What troubled you about the bill?
I think coming into it, the concern from those that I represent is the idea that ratepayers could then be responsible for a technology that may not work. And I think that was the thing that really draw the concern and threw up the red flag for me, in fact, someone from the Evansville area came and testified against that bill. And that was the thing that really rose the red flag for me, in which I couldn't support 1007.
And just to clarify, this would essentially say that the utilities about which we spoke earlier would be able to offset development costs. Even if the project never came to fruition, they still could take the plunge or explore these modular nuclear reactors, which aren't operating anywhere else in the country, but I guess there's a desire to be among the first here. It makes sense to you, Matt Bell?
It's a bold vision for Indiana's energy future, and look, that's going to take investment. I, am one who believes that more of that investment should be borne by shareholders of investor-owned utilities and not by ratepayers. I hope that the legislature will find a better balance there, but at the end of the day, encouraging Indiana to incent in technologies of the future that will meet those demands. And I have to disagree a little bit with my friend Kerwin's portrayal of the coal industry. Our coal industry in Indiana has never been cleaner. It has never been safer environmentally. And it provides the most affordable and reliable bridge to nuclear. Operating our coal plants to the end of their useful lives, given the investments that have been made in environmental and safety, is absolutely the way that we bridge this affordability and reliability gap. We live in a state where we have 330 years of coal underneath the ground. And all of the above strategy has to embrace coal as part of its core foundation.
And in fact, one of the parts of that same bill that we just spoke about that you probably like even more than the nudge toward nuclear power would be the greater concern on the part of the Utility Regulatory Commission and others being instructed to look very carefully about the dismantling of coal facilities and their transition, if you will, to other forms, renewable. I'm guessing that would be the favorite part of that bill. What's wrong with the bill, Kerwin Olson?
Well, first of all, that bill probably should be 3 or 4 separate bills because it's a heavy bill with a lot of issues.
Does the nuclear type thing, does the
Yes.
coal, the transition aspect, some other things that cover utilities that are making investments and
Yeah.
sort of dispatchable I guess that's the term now, dispatchable energy.
Yeah, obviously we object strenuously to the components of the bill dealing with small modular reactors and putting that risk on ratepayers. That's simply not fair, especially for technology that 20 years ago was 10 years away, 10 years ago was 10 years away, today it's 10 years away. So again, to your point earlier, we're using ratepayers as economic development tools, helping to subsidize huge corporations, and that burden really should fall on those companies. Ratepayers pay for service. Ratepayers shouldn't be held responsible for economic development. That's the responsibility of shareholders, and I would argue a responsibility potentially of taxpayers, but certainly not ratepayers in a small service territory. Part of the bill is good in the context of promising some protections for customers from these exorbitant costs of data centers, but we just can't get around that tracker for small modular reactors that puts ratepayers on the hooks and only stands to exacerbate the affordability crisis and provide no contribution to the reliability of our grid, considering the technology is not ready.
Well, Jon Ford, wouldn't the embrace of this at the state level potentially hurt the coal industry?
I think listen, small nuclear reactors are a long time away. They're, 10, 15 years away. And Kerwin makes a good point that, we've talked about it for a while and they haven't come to fruition. But I think today things are different, right? I think the technology, the companies that want these have balance sheets like we've never seen before. And what we're trying to do, I think with this bill, the legislature's trying to say we're open for investment. And it's a starting point to make deals, to help get them interested in Indiana, partner with utilities, partner with the state, and come up with a deal that respects ratepayers. And it's the beginning of that.
And we talk about this small modular reactors, this technology. It's in place now, and I guess running in China and Russia. Nowhere in the United States. Should that be sound the alarm bells, Alex Burton?
I think the word that if I had to have this conversation down to one word, it would be agility. We have to be thinking in the future and where we're going as it relates to energy, but we also have to be cognizant of where our ratepayers, the burden that they currently face right now. We have to keep that top of mind, and I'm looking forward to being part of the conversations to make sure that as we're talking about the future of energy, we're also being cognizant of Hoosiers who are paying their bills every month.
Bold words from a man who tore his Achilles playing basketball in a legislative game this week, agility. I know you'll get it back. How about this notion? Is this too untested, this technology, do you think, Matt Bell?
I don't. I think that Indiana is correct to be pursuing a future that is based on clean nuclear energy. I believe that our existing coal fleet and our existing assets are a good bridge to get there, and we have to build while we develop small modular reactors in Indiana, or we won't be able to meet the demands of our economy. It would be wrong for policymakers in the state of Indiana to not look to a nuclear future and understand the steps we need to go through to get there, to encourage that investment, to ensure that we have an abundant supply of energy, not in 10 years, not in 20 years, but in 50 years.
And I know, Kerwin Olson, you talked about this also when you testified. You wanted lawmakers to frame this not about saying which forms of energy are good. It's maybe in some sectors, wind is bad, or solar is bad. You say, don't think about this. Think about the dollars and cents impact on ratepayers. Is that really what this comes down to in your eyes, or is there a safety concern for CAC as well?
Oh, we're opposed to nuclear power generally. We still have no solution for the radioactive waste.
So that's a starting point. You're opposed to it, but
no, I think with this piece of legislation, the starting point is, Mr. Ford referenced the balance sheets of those companies. The balance sheets of those companies that want these technologies certainly looks better than the balance sheet of households trying to decide whether they can pay rent, pick up their prescriptions or pay their utility bills. So that's our issue with the bills. Those balance sheets of those companies can support development costs, and that is not the role of the ratepayer. And my friend Matt here, I don't find it surprising that the coal industry, of course, is touting small modular reactors that aren't ready yet and may never be ready, because we see that as just obstruct and delay to keep your coal plants open.
Part of the strategy, Matt Bell?
Absolutely not. We believe that nuclear is a big part of the future, and we believe that we're the appropriate bridge to get there. When we see countries developing economically across the world, they're developing coal plants to fire their economies, and they're doing that because it's the most affordable and today far cleaner than it's ever been. Indiana should maximize that resource as it plans towards a future where I believe nuclear will be an important part and probably the hallmark of where we end.
If I may, we talk about the most affordable. It's the utility companies themselves retiring coal-fired power plants because of the economics. And then talking of SMRs, Duke Energy, in their most recent IRP, screened out small modular reactors because of the cost. So we see neither choice as affordable. We've got affordable technologies available on the shelf today: wind, solar, batteries, and heavens knows efficiency. We should be investing in things that reduce demand on the grid, that provide choices for customers, reduce monthly bills, and put money in the pocketbooks of everyday working class Hoosiers who need that money.
Final word. We're almost out of time here, Jon Ford. In 4 years, if you keep this position to the first term of the Braun administration, we'll decide on a second term later. Will this conversation be the same, or will it be fundamentally different?
I think it'll be somewhat the same, but hopefully have moved forward, right? We're talking about solving some of the issues with large off-takers and how we're providing them energy for the future, and hopefully doing it in a way that respects the ratepayers the best that we can.
All right. Thank you all very much for your input
on
this very important topic. Again, my guests have been Democratic Representative Alex Burton of Evansville, Jon Ford of the Indiana Office of Energy Development, Kerwin Olson of the Citizens Action Coalition, and Matt Bell of Reliable Energy. Time now for our weekly visit with Indiana Lawmakers analyst Ed Feigenbaum, publisher of the newsletter Indiana Legislative Insight, part of Hannah News Service. Well, Ed, at the end of last session, you correctly pointed out, I remember when we were sort of assessing the session and looking ahead, that energy issues would be front and center. Is this what you imagined?
Well, certainly on the reliability front, John, that's the big push from the administration and from the industry. But I thought that there'd be more of a focus on affordability, because they're starting to build some kind of groundswell in a lot of communities around the state, particularly focused around Evansville, about affordability issues. And one of their utilities in particular down there that was raising their prices, raising distribution fees. So the distribution fees were almost as much as the cost of the actual utility service. And the municipal governments down in Southwest Indiana in particular were getting very upset about the costs that they were having to pay and not being able to recoup those kinds of costs, because that's not something that's really something you can pass on to the constituency. And we really haven't seen that kind of a groundswell that I expected from consumers on this. I thought that it would be a lot more like we're seeing, or we saw during the campaign, on property taxes. But that's to come.
Does that change, or is this the debate what we've seen thus far is going to see us through to the end of the session?
Well, the important thing right now is being able to provide the service, as our panelists pointed out. And then you've got to look beyond that to managing to promote economic development in the state by making sure that you've got the ability to service these new data centers and what have you that are coming in. And so at that point, availability becomes a bigger issue than affordability.
All right, we'll leave it there, Ed. As always, appreciate your insight.
Thank you, John.
Who has the authority to make decisions in higher education? University presidents, faculty, and staff in public institutions might argue that it's their right, while some legislators disagree and say it's their responsibility. Last session, the Indiana General Assembly passed a law allowing universities to evaluate and subsequently revoke a professor's tenure if they fail to show, quote, intellectual diversity. On the next Indiana Lawmakers. Well, that concludes another edition of Indiana Lawmakers. Until next week, take care.
Indiana Lawmakers is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.